Hello Year 12 Tudor people. In this video, I'm going to talk you through how best to plan and write an answer to the following essay question. A psychological aversion to marriage was the main reason why Elizabeth I never married. To what extent do you agree? Now, when we're writing this essay and when we're planning it, I want us to be looking out for what we need to do to get that A or A star in the end of year 13. So I want you to keep the word extent at the forefront of your minds. To what extent was it psychological aversion that meant that she didn't get married? I want you to make sure that you have a really strong judgment that leads through our argument and writing. So whatever you say in the introduction, you need to keep coming back to it throughout your paragraphs. I want you to build your argument by comparing and contrasting factors and always linking back to what you've said in your introduction, as I said before. And finally, we also need to make sure that we're peppering our answer with detailed examples. However, we're not waffling, we're not explaining a lot of it. When we're using examples, we're using it only to build our argument. So what factors could we talk about with this essay? Well, first of all, we need to make sure that we definitely talk about psychological trauma, even if we don't believe it was the main factor, even if we don't believe it, the extent to which she didn't get married was massively to do with psychological trauma. We might also decide to talk about her eyes, Robert Dudley, and her love for him and why that meant she didn't get married. We might also bring in the idea of a lack of a suitable, fully supported foreign match that she could decide upon. And finally, we might also bring in the examples of prior relatives' marriages, i.e. the Refer Warnick argument. You can see here in this slide, which you can pause and have a look at to help you with your planning, I've broken down the evidence that I would use for each of those factors. So in terms of psychological trauma, I might talk about the death of her mother, the death of Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard and the Seymour affair. With prior marriages, I'd talk about Jane Grey and Dudley, Mary and Philip, Mary Queen of Scots, and the speeches that she gave in the 1559 and the 1560s as well. I might talk about the fears concerning a successor, the fact that she felt that if she named a successor, they would become the other person who might overthrow her. And I might also talk about that Sir James Melville quote I talked about in the earlier video about the Queen of England being too proud to suffer a commander, wanting to become queen or king. Wanting to be both queen and king. I'd also mention the love of Robert Dudley. So I bring in the evidence of her and him being childhood friends, the evidence of their deep love, the fact that she called him her eyes, that she held on to his last letter. I might also mention the court gossip or the fact that ambassadors wrote quite regularly of their inappropriate relationship. Finally, I talk about that lack of a suitable foreign match, so I'll talk about that faction between Cecil and Dudley, the fact that Cecil was pro-Archduke Charles of Austria, whilst Dudley and Throckmorton, his ally, had been pro-Charles IX. I might also talk about the fact that Sir Thomas Smith also backed the Alençon match. However, in all of these arguments, in all of these factors in my paragraphs, I'm going to think about what my actual argument would be. So I would probably argue that the whole time that everything to do with Elizabeth and marriage came back to power. So after I've mentioned my evidence of psychological trauma or my evidence of the marriages or her love of Robert Dudley or the lack of a suitable foreign match, I'm going to bring in the however. I'm going to try and dispute that particular argument so I can bring it back to the reason why I think power was the most important. So if we take the example of psychological trauma, I might try and discount that particular argument by saying that it's reliant on psychoanalysis. There isn't evidence of what Elizabeth thought or felt. She was very guarded with her own feelings. We can't evidence Elizabeth's thought or emotions. The fact that she was free for an 8 in turn when her mother died in May 1536, when Jane Seymour died and when Catherine Howard had her head chopped off. That she saw herself as the lion's cub, therefore she loved her father, and perhaps it wasn't, his marriages that had led to her deciding not to get married. And finally, that Seymour did affect her. However, she always did seem to be pro, or certainly able to consider getting married throughout the rest of her reign. So if this was my essay, as I've said, my argument would always be that it was protection of her prerogative and her power, which was the reason why she remained unwed. So I'm going to think, now that I've thought about my planning, now that I've thought about my evidence, in what order am I going to put my paragraphs and my factors? So I probably put the prior marriages first. That's quite a juicy argument that you can go into there. You can really link those prior marriages to why Elizabeth would want to therefore not get married, to protect her own power and her own reign and to avoid rebellions such as Wyatt's rebellion. I might then, secondly, link that quite well to the lack of a suitor. The fact that Elizabeth would be concerned in choosing a suitor that she might either trigger faction or again a rebellion such as Wyatt's, or that there were just too many options and there was not that perfect one that would mean that she could make that decision, keep everybody happy and also protect her own prerogative. I'm then third going to come on to psychological trauma. I'm going to talk about this because I have to talk about this because it's in the question, but I'm going to largely discount it. And finally, I'm going to come back to her inability to marry Robert Dudley, because I actually think that in marrying Robert Dudley, that possibly could have had the biggest impact on her power anyway, because he was such a controversial figure at court. And in all things, as I'm writing and planning this essay, I'm thinking at the end that I'm going to link it back to power, that I'm going to link my argument, that I'm going to link what I've said about marriages, a suitor, psychological trauma, or Dudley, either back to power, or I'm going to show how power was more important. Okay? So before you head off and start to write and plan this essay, I want to remind you that in the description of this video and in an email to you, I've sent an essay for this question that I've already started for you. So I've written the introduction. We're all going to have the same first paragraph, which I've written for you, and then you're going to complete the essay. So make sure you look out for that. Finally, if you're confused in any way, or you don't know what your argument should be, or you don't know how to write this essay, make sure that you are emailing me so that I can get in contact with you. However, good luck with the essay. I know you're going to write something really, really brilliant. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep it Tudor.